Okay, so you know all those headlines about Elon Musk, like, shaking up the government?
Yeah.
Well, things are getting really interesting. We're going to do a deep dive into Musk's new role, try to figure out if it's really about efficiency or
Or something else.
or something else entirely, yeah,
Mm.
and what it might all mean.
Right, because it's not your typical situation to see a tech CEO like right in the heart of the government.
Exactly, yeah.
Huh.
We've got articles here from the New York Times, Washington
Oh,
Post,
oh.
The Atlantic. So,
Big hitters.
yeah, I was trying to figure this out. So first, like, what is Elon Musk actually doing?
Right.
Officially, he's a, quote, special government employee heading the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE.
Boji.
DOGE, yeah.
Okay.
But the New York Times points out that this, quote, special government employee thing, it's usually, you know,
It's usually not what it sounds like.
yeah,
Like
right.
it's temporary, they're advisors, they lend their expertise, but they're not like running the show.
Yeah,
But Musk seems to be operating with like way more authority.
yeah. And the Times also highlights that he has direct access to the president
Oh, wow.
and operates with very little oversight.
Which is, I mean, pretty unusual. You'd think there'd be more checks and balances, right?
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
someone in that position.
Right.
And that raises some serious questions about accountability.
Yeah, and not to mention that his companies, SpaceX and Tesla, they have government contracts. So
Oh, right.
there's huge potential for conflicts of interest there.
Yeah, absolutely.
The Times even reported that he pushed for Troy Mink, the former head of the Pentagon's National Reconnaissance Office, to be Air Force Secretary.
I did not see that.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay, so that's interesting because the NRO, the National Reconnaissance Office, is the one that helped Mink get that huge contract for SpaceX to build a spy satellite network.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, there are a lot of connections there.
It's a tangled web.
Yeah, it really is.
So Musk has a lot of power, but how is he actually using it?
Yeah.
What are his, like, targets and tactics?
Well, his team, which is mostly like young engineers from his companies,
Right.
have targeted a bunch of agencies: Treasury, USAI, the Office of Personnel Management, GSA, even the Department of Education.
Wow. The New York Times and The Atlantic both describe his approach as, like, aggressive, secretive,
Mhm.
focused on getting access to all the data and the financial systems.
Yeah, and that's raising concerns about due process and transparency. I mean, there are reasons why government agencies have those protocols, right?
Right.
Especially when you're dealing with sensitive information.
Right. It reminds me of those DOGE sticky notes
Yeah.
that showed up on office doors right after the inauguration.
Right.
It felt very like power move.
It did, like a corporate takeover, yeah.
Yeah.
Like, is that how you approach governing institutions? I don't know.
Right. And then there's the USAID situation.
Yeah.
The Washington Post reported that DOGE representatives just demanded access to their systems.
Wow.
And when security officials resisted, they were put on administrative leave. Yeah. The Times said that an acting administrator put about 60 senior officials on paid leave,
No.
issued stop work orders, and eventually hundreds of contractors were fired.
Wow. That's a lot.
Yeah, and then there's Musk's comment on X about, feeding USAID into a wood chipper.
Right. I saw that one.
So if we step back and look at it all, these tactics,
Yeah.
they kind of mirror his behavior at Twitter, right?
Yeah, very much so. It's like this pattern of rapid change, disregard for norms,
Uh-huh.
a focus on just getting things done quickly, even if it means like disrupting all these existing structures and processes.
Yeah, and just like Twitter, there's been this mass exodus of experienced government employees.
Yeah.
And the Atlantic even called it a bureaucratic coup.
I saw that. It sounds dramatic, but
Yeah.
it kind of captures the feeling of what's happening.
Yeah, and it's not just the change itself. It's like the speed at which it's happening.
Yeah, that's what's concerning. I mean, this disregard for norms and this breakneck speed, it reminds me of other times in history when democracies were dismantled.
Oh, wow.
And it happened really quickly. Like, think about how fast Hitler consolidated power in 1930s Germany. There was an article in The Atlantic about that.
It's a chilling reminder that, democracies can be fragile.
They really are. Even seemingly small things can erode those norms if they start to chip away at institutions and concentrate power in the hands of just a few.
So we've seen Musk's role, his tactics, how fast things are changing. But what about the whole efficiency argument? Is DOGE actually saving money like it's supposed to?
Well, that's the big question, right? Musk claims they're saving billions by canceling contracts, especially those related to DEI initiatives, diversity, equity, inclusion, and unoccupied buildings. But the New York Times quotes some budget experts, and they're not so sure. Yeah, they're saying it's like one-time savings, not real systemic change. And they point out that DOGE doesn't actually have the authority to make those big, lasting changes that would really reform spending.
It's like putting a Band-Aid on a bigger problem.
Yeah.
And Musk seems super focused on tech. He
Yeah.
took over the U.S. Digital Service, renamed it to the U.S. DOGE Service, and wants to automate more government functions.
Yeah, which raises some big questions like, can technology really solve the problems that government deals with?
Yeah.
Are these changes going to last? Or will we see unintended consequences down the line?
Is it really about efficiency? Or is there something else going on? Like, is Musk even qualified to do this, to, like, reshape government?
Yeah, it's a valid question. And we're seeing pushback. Democrats and watchdog groups are like really concerned. They're questioning if Musk's actions are even legal
Yeah.
and if there are potential violations of federal law.
The Times reported on at least 4 lawsuits, like, challenging his authority and the legality of it all.
Yeah, it's just the beginning of those legal battles. But the bigger concern is this concentration of power in someone who's not elected and who has a history of, like, pushing the boundaries.
The Times talked to government employees who described being interviewed by Musk's people, and a lot of them wouldn't even give their last names.
Oh, wow.
They called them, quote, one-way interviews, where they'd be asked, like, who should be fired, but they got no information back.
I can't even imagine, like, how unsettling that would be.
Yeah.
To be questioned by people with, unclear motives
Right.
and unchecked power.
Yeah.
It just creates, like, a climate of fear and uncertainty.
The Times even mentioned that some of Musk's team would show up in, like, blazers and T-shirts.
Oh, really?
Yeah, government staff started calling them the Bobs after those consultant characters in the movie Office Space.
Oh, right.
The ones who were brought in to lay everyone off.
Right. Yeah, that's a good comparison. It's like this clash of cultures, You've
Yeah.
got these young, tech-focused people coming into these institutions that have been around for so long with this mandate to, like, disrupt everything.
Yeah.
And they're moving so fast.
Yeah, the Times reported that a lot of his lieutenants were working on multiple projects at different agencies at the same time,
Oh, wow.
often using different email addresses
Oh, my God.
and showing up at offices without clear identification.
That makes it almost impossible to track who's making decisions and what their qualifications are.
Right.
It's just confusing, and it raises concerns about, like, conflicts of interest.
How do we even know they're prioritizing the public good
Yeah.
and not, Musk's companies or his own agenda?
Exactly. The Times gave an example of this guy, Luke Ferreter. He's like 23, a former SpaceX intern. He was involved with gaining access to USAID systems, but he was also listed as an executive engineer at the Department of Health and Human Services and had an email at GSA.
That's a lot of responsibility.
It is, for someone so young and with such limited experience in government.
Then there's Steve Davis, a longtime Musk advisor. The Times said he's, like, amassed extraordinary power across federal agencies and is leading the cost-cutting effort behind the scenes.
Another example of unelected power. I mean, Davis's background is in cost-cutting for Musk's companies, not public service or policymaking. Like, does he even get the complexities of government?
Right.
The consequences of his decisions?
The Times mentioned that Musk told friends that he sees dollars saved per day as the ultimate measure of success.
That's such a business mindset. Like, what about all the non-financial parts of government? What about social programs, education, infrastructure? You can't just measure those things in terms of immediate cost savings.
Right. Efficiency is important, but not at the expense of effectiveness, fairness.
Exactly. We need to think about the long-term impact of these changes. Like,
Right.
Are we cutting corners today that'll cost us more tomorrow? Will dismantling these programs and institutions create instability?
And they don't even have clear goals or metrics beyond, dollars saved. So it's
Yeah.
hard to even judge if they're doing what they set out to do.
Right. There's no framework. It's impossible to hold them accountable or determine if their actions actually serve the public.
So we've got this secrecy, questionable hiring, a focus on short-term savings, no real way to measure success. It doesn't exactly inspire confidence.
No, it doesn't. It's like a recipe for abuse. And when you consider it's all being done by someone who isn't elected and has a history of, impulsive behavior, disregard for rules,
Right.
it's even more concerning.
It seems like we need way more scrutiny of DOGE, like Congress needs to step up and do its job of overseeing the executive branch.
Yeah, and it's not just Congress. The courts, too. They need to determine if these changes are even legal.
Right.
And make sure people's rights are being protected.
Yeah, but ultimately it comes back to us, the public.
Yeah.
We have to demand transparency and accountability from our government.
Yeah, we can't just sit back and let these radical changes happen
Right.
without, asking tough questions and holding those in power accountable.
Yeah. So far, we've mainly focused on like the concerns about DOGE and Musk. But to be fair, there are different perspectives out there.
Absolutely there are. I mean, the articles we've talked about, they definitely highlight the anxieties and criticisms, but some people see this as a much needed shakeup,
Right.
you know?
Yeah. Of this like bloated and inefficient system.
Right.
So let's play devil's advocate for a second.
Okay.
What are some of the arguments in favor of DOGE and Musk's involvement?
Well, I think one of the biggest arguments is that the government has just become too big, too complex, too slow to react. The people who support DOGE, they think that a radical restructuring is like the only way to cut waste, streamline things, make the government more responsive.
It's that drain the swamp mentality.
Right, exactly.
Like career bureaucrats, they're stuck in their ways, resistant to change.
Yeah.
So you need an outsider like Musk to come in and shake things up.
Right. And to be fair, there is a long history of inefficiency and waste in government. I mean, every administration promises to streamline things, but it rarely happens. So for some people, Musk is like that bull in the china shop. He's not afraid to break things,
Yeah.
challenge the status quo.
They believe he can bring that Silicon Valley like innovation mindset to government
Right.
and make it more efficient.
Right.
But can that even work? It's not just about efficiency and profits. It's about like serving people, upholding the law, protecting our democracy.
Right. That's the core of the debate. The critics say that Musk's emphasis on, speed and disruption, it clashes with how government is supposed to work. Like the careful deliberation, consensus building that's so important for good governance.
Right. They're worried that his actions are like eroding public trust
Yeah.
and creating fear and uncertainty.
And the lack of transparency just makes it worse.
Right. So even if there are potential benefits to streamlining and innovating, there are also these real concerns about his methods and his motives.
Right. It always comes down to, do the ends justify the means?
Yeah.
Like, even if DOGE makes things more efficient, is it worth the cost to our democracy?
Right. Our transparency, accountability, which brings us back to like, what do we even want from our government?
Right.
Do we prioritize speed and disruption above everything else?
Those are the questions we all have to think about. There are no easy answers, and the stakes are really high.
So in this deep dive, we've seen Musk's unusual role in government, his aggressive tactics, the concerns about transparency and accountability, and this debate about efficiency versus democratic values. It's been a lot.
It really has. And we've only scratched the surface, but I think this gives you a good idea of how complex this all is.
So what does it all mean? Well, Musk is clearly a powerful force, and his actions will have a lasting impact.
Whether that impact is good or bad, I guess only time will tell. But this is definitely a defining moment, and the choices we make now will have consequences.
This deep dive has raised more questions than it answered.
It really has.
But that's okay. The point was to, like, get you thinking and to be part of the conversation.
Right. We wanted to show you different perspectives, the key facts, and challenge some assumptions. Now it's up to you to decide where you stand.
What do you think about Musk's role in government? Is it justified? Or a threat? What kind of future do you want? These are all things worth thinking about and talking about and ultimately taking action on. The future is in our hands.
It's not predetermined. We shape it by the choices we make.
So that brings us to the end of our deep dive. We hope you enjoyed it, and we encourage you to keep learning, keep asking questions, and stay engaged.
Until next time, stay curious.